I'm Meta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, but we're going to go to Paris and we're going to go to Berkeley, California. And boy, are we going to have an interesting time today because I am going to talk to two of the most interesting women in the world. Both of them were born and raised in an area adjacent to and where their families were part of the nuclear weapons production system. And so one was at Hanford, Washington, which is where the plutonium pits for American nuclear weapons were being created. And the other one was in a place called Mayak in Russia. So in Paris, Nadezhda Kutepova is my Russian friend. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is there in Paris.
It's already evening in Paris. Good evening, Meta. Good evening, Trisha.
And in Berkeley, which is my old hometown in a way, is Trisha Pritikin. And she is the lady who was born and raised around Hanford, Washington. And now she has produced a book of her own about this, in which she's taken the cause up of all the other people who were exposed and made sick by, or even killed by exposure to the radiation. Trisha, hello, how are you?
Greetings. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm fine. Thanks.
Good. Hold up your book because you have a copy.
Yeah. Okay. This is the front cover. I'll try to put it in the middle.
And the Hanford Plaintiffs, Trisha Pritikin, and you've just won some award for it, right?
Yeah, I think 7 of them by now, which is quite amazing for a first-time author. I'm really thankful. It'll increase awareness, I think, of the subject.
I think you are both lawyers also. Isn't that true? You both have been trained in law, and you've used your experience as lawyers to work on behalf of other victims who have also suffered. So the similarities between you are quite remarkable. Nadezhda, I think your book is coming out when? It's going to be in Russian. And when will you have a copy?
Beginning of October, yes.
Okay. Trisha, why don't you start with maybe a couple of minutes, if you can encapsulate any of this richness.
I'm a generation before Nadia. I'm almost 70. So I was exposed. I actually am 70. I forgot. I had my birthday. I was exposed to a lot of radiation that came out of Hanford, byproducts of the production of plutonium. And so I went and I read a lot about the Mayak accident because I wanted to understand sort of what happened, when it happened, and how that related to all the other releases that probably came out of Mayak. And so both of our sites had a lot of stuff coming out of them, byproducts of plutonium production, whereas Mayak had one big boom in 1957, in addition to a lot of other stuff that came out. But I want to emphasize before anything else that Nadia is much more courageous than I could ever be, because I don't have to face the same repercussions that she has to face in the work that she does. Here in the United States, I get ignored, or, simply the authorities just don't pay attention to me and I don't get anywhere. But for her, she pays major price for her activism. And so that's a really important thing that I wanted to put out there at first. She's very courageous. I don't know if I could be that courageous. And so a lot of the other similarities, just the fact that it's hard work. I've done this work for 30 years, since 1986, when I learned about the releases from Hanford that had been kept secret over 40 years. My whole family has died of radiogenic cancers. My brother died as well. And I was reading Nadia's story of her mother. My mom also died of what I believe is a radiogenic cancer, and she has got no compensation or anything. So there's many similarities. Many victims downwind of Hanford have received nothing. Just the same situation. But again, the big thing for me is how courageous Nadia has had to be to do her work. Whereas for me, I keep trying, and sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. And I live with a lot of health problems.
Well, that's the thing that I want to point out, is that although you haven't been intimidated necessarily by that you'd be thrown in prison or persecuted, you have had health issues all your life practically, and they clearly are traced to your childhood exposure or in
Right.
utero, I think you once said.
Yes, in utero, and as a baby, we drank milk laced with radioactive iodine, and there was just stuff in the air and everything. And I think had Nadia been the same age as me, she would have gone through the exact same thing and had the exact same health issues that I have, because a lot of us who grew up as children I was born in 1950, so people who are there in the early years of Hanford now suffer from cancers, autoimmune disease, infertility. A lot of them have died already. So, it's the same picture on both sides of the world. And I read one quote. I just want to say this real quick and then I'll shut up for a minute. But it said, some people say if you made a hole straight through the earth from Mayak, it would hit Richland. It's sort of like, because we're on the opposite sides of the world. And Hanford and Richland was actually the map or the model for Mayak. It's like these spies brought this information over to the former Soviet Union, and they built Mayak based on the plans of Hanford and Richland. So we both grew up in cities that are very, very similar, secret cities. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting to compare the two.
Fascinating. Yeah. The comparisons are more than striking. It's spooky almost.
Yeah.
Okay. Nadezhda,
Yeah.
you've already heard about Trisha, and you knew it anyway. But tell me, I don't know how you're going to summarize something so extensive. You actually had to flee from Russia, not the Soviet Union, but much more recent from Russia, because there were real political risks for what you were doing. And I don't know what would have happened, but you might have been prosecuted or jailed or done something terrible would have happened to you for the work that you were doing on behalf of the other people around your hometown, Mayak, who had also suffered. Tell us a little about that and how you came to Paris and how you're becoming or are already established as a lawyer.
I don't think that I'm really brave. You know that when you are brave from the despair, it's not real brave. It just means that you have not another choice. So it's interesting, this situation, to compare story of me and story of Trisha, because if we compare, we see that first of all the government made the main was making the main way. It means that secret place, they created in secret conditions something to win their opponent, potential opponent. They don't pay attention ni for the population, ni for the workers. It was like a big experiment to side. And I think that we organized this meeting exactly 2 days before the next anniversary of Mayak accident, because 1957, it's a very important point in the history of nuclear industry of nuclear weapons, because I know now from archives that the Americans, USA leaders knew about Mayak accident. And in normal condition, they had to inform community, population, media, but they kept this secret, even they were opponent of Soviet Union. And we see how they were, I do not know this more in English, in French it's complot. It means that when the opponents keep secret together to win something. In this case, it was to win, to continue use nuclear power, because I think that, okay, Soviet Union kept secret because they hoped they managed by population, but if the secret of this accident and the consequences of this accident were opened either for USA public and then maybe for Europe public, maybe in this case we had another development of war now, because the leaders could say and the people and the public could say that we should stop if we have such terrible consequences, we should stop it. But neither USA leaders, neither USSR leaders uh, did not do it for all reason, and that's why today we have little bit the same situation when officially they are opponent, but in reality we see that they follow the same way. It means that no any how does it compensation. They don't want to recognize damage. They try to make a lie about the consequences about radiobiology, and they try to again use this situation to continue to create new nuclear weapons, to keep secret about things which are not secret, because radioactivity is always the border area between the is it secret, it's not secret. And that's why they are absolutely um, they are absolutely free from any responsibility and any liability. They are successful, and it is the same even USA or even Russia or Soviet Union.
The press hasn't done anything. I mean, you as private citizens taking your own risks and doing the work yourself without any support. Both of you have done the research to establish the facts about the health effects of this radioactive exposure. And you have written books, and I don't know how well they will be publicized. I don't know how much the government will try to suppress publication or publicity about your books, but they clearly don't want this to be known to this day. They're not keen to have anybody aware of it. So why is it that even in a free country like the US, the amount of publicity that has been done by journalists has been so minimal?
When you have mushroom clouds and testing, it's hard to hide that from the public. So there has been more coverage of the tests, like Nevada Test Site, Trinity Test. Not that they've received the compensation that they deserve, people who've been exposed, but there's been more coverage because you can't hide it. Whereas for production facilities, they're very quiet. You don't see much, you don't hear much. You're just producing the plutonium, sending it off. People, in fact, I remember reading this, something Nadia said, and I agree. My father told me that the place made power, and actually they had no power reactors out there. They were all plutonium production until 1961 or two. And I think your parents said they made, I don't know, can't remember, paper something or other. So, people don't even know what's going on out there, and there's no mushroom clouds, nothing like that. So,
well, hold on. Did your father not know, or both of your fathers did not know, or were they part of the whole secrecy thing, so that they couldn't tell you? What do you think?
When they were employed officially, they signed the papers. In those moments, of course, they will agree, because if you're not agree with the condition, you're not employed. So right. It was logical. And you know that when the person is employed by this industry, it becomes a little bit nuclear slavery. I can use it. It's like a nuclear slavery. You're in a total dependence from this industry, and the first things. The second thing that Trisha told, that it's invisible. You are working, and the third part, it's also, everybody always hope maybe he will. Maybe this destiny will not come. Maybe these people died, but maybe I will be alive. So, and it's also characterized the workers of nuclear industry even today, because that official statistic is terrible of mortality of people of nuclear industry. But in any case, in other people, new generation, they come, they are working, they again died, and again new generation try to avoid it. So we can't answer on this question, but in any case, it's very profitable for nuclear industry, this nuclear slavery and slavery silence.
Well, to what extent do they delude themselves? Deny it mentally and try to pretend that there's nothing that and not you know, with climate denial or COVID denial or something. You have large parts of the population who certainly have access to the information, but nevertheless manage somehow not to know or not to believe it. In the case of your parents, what was going on? You looking back on them when you were growing up, do you think they were self-deluded, or was it that they understood perfectly well, but they were in a situation where they couldn't afford to share their knowledge?
Basically, during the time my parents were at Hanford from 47 through 60, we left in 1960. This was the Cold War, and the Americans believed that the Soviets might come over and drop a bomb or two on us, nuclear bomb. So they were trying to build a stockpile of nuclear weapons, and they felt justified doing this, that it was really important to be strong against the communists. And that's why they were like that. My mother had really, I don't know what was going on with her, but I asked her after my dad died, you know, did you know that, you know, my father was making plutonium at Hanford? And she just seemed so surprised. She said, no, he wasn't. He was making power. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe she thought that, you know. So this whole time, and she's a smart person. She's not like a person you can fool.
Mm-hmm. What about your father? What did, I mean, he had to know what he was making.
He was a nuclear engineer. He was in charge of the 9 reactors there, overseeing them. So he certainly knew what they were doing.
So he knew he was flat out lying to his own family.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He was obligated to keep secret, I think. And also it was a time, you know, that it's also part of nuclear industry to, how to say, to give people ideological information, to make them like a patriot, that there is a power for which we should be opponents and we should be united together, because it was the same fairy tale in Soviet Union when we were fighting against Americans.
Yeah.
So for us it was, you know, that I have read many memories. I was young when my father died, and I have never talked with him about this story. And but then I have read many memories of people, and they explain that the main power which made them to work hardly with big enthusiasm, with even without health, it was like we have enemy, we should fight against this enemy. If we will not fight, they will kill us, and that's all. So of course we can't compare the situation of Cold War with the contemporary situation, but we see that this part of ideology always exists, especially now when the Putin quarreled with all around the world, and when his main power it's nuclear weapons, when he began to say, we have such power. Mm-hmm. So and we see that ideology by which they feed people, it exists always. And
okay, Nadesha, would you tell us about your family's health? I think you said your father died as a result of that one big explosion.
My grandmother, she was a chemical engineer, and she arrived. She was mobilized by Communist Party to build Mayak in 1948. And she arrived and she was working there, and she was liquidated of the accident of 1957, and she died in 1965, 7 years before my birth, from the cancer of lymph system. I have never known her, My father, he was also mobilized from the capital of neighbor city next day of after accident of 1957, and first of all he made a cleanup job for liquidation of consequences of accident of 1957, but then he was a nuclear engineer at the reprocessing plant, and he became to be ill by cancer of stomach and intestine
Mhm.
in when I was 11, and so he died when I was 13, and we can't to identify it exactly where he received the big doses, because you know that reprocessing plant it's not so must clean part of her border. Officially, yes, officially after 20 years after his death, um, I applied to special counsel, and they identified this, that the reason of his um, the reason of his death is connected with radiation during after cleanup job for accident 1957, but we don't know exactly. In any case, he received a huge dose and he died from the consequences of radiation. And
Mhm.
the third, okay, it was a third case which I have known, and which how to say, made me maybe a human rights defender, that he had a daughter before me, because with my mother it was a second marriage, and his daughter, she was born my sister, like half sister,
Mhm.
and she was born after accident maybe 60 um, 68, 69, no, 58, 59, and she suffered from disease of brain, and she died from this reason. And my mom told me that we had many kids from liquidators, fathered liquidators in those time.
Mhm.
And some members of family which are like parents of my husband's, and they also died. It means that but for our city, it was a usual story. You know that when you child and when you grow up with a story, many people died from cancer, and it's usual things. It's just like everyday things. You don't think about it. And
Yeah. Well, now, is cancer the most common final cause of death from radiation, or what? You say you had a half sister with brain damage or something
yeah,
from.
it was not cancer. It was a damage. I don't know which damage it was, because for reason that she died, and we could not find the documents about this case. I knew this story just from my mom, who was a doctor and who could have access, but maybe she also tried to catch something. You know that the problem of contaminated place, which we see now, and which I can constate like a lawyer, that the people who know that their parents, grandparents, or even grandparents suffered from radiation exposure try to catch this information,
Mhm.
because they think that maybe their genes are damaged and nobody will be married with them, because they can have the next generation with malformation, with the birth defects. So and it is very ethical part of this issue, how we should do.
Mhm.
For example, me, if I know that my genes are damaged, should I prevent my potential husband uh, or no? And last year I had one family. It's a family who still is living near Techa River. It's a river where Mayak was dumping nuclear waste and still dump. We are sure that he still dumps, because they have not another capacity to keep this nuclear waste. It is fourth generation, so it means that first generation, second generation, third generation was living there, and the child is absolutely with many birth defects. He was operated in Moscow. He's a problem with many parts of body. I will be not mention it. And this woman wrote me by internet, and she asked my law help, and I began to talk with her about how we can manage by case, which paper we should make, which where we should write. And that she told me that I will be think. And after 4 months of preparing, she told me, that I decided I will be not fight for this case. And I was really disappointed. Why? And she told me, that first of all, now we are operated in Moscow, so visibly everything is good. Um, so this child looks healthy, and somebody who does not know that he had problem with the heart, with the stomach, and with the urine system, they don't know. The second thing, we are living in little village, and I do not know that my neighborhoods will know that about problem with the fertility of my son, because nobody will marry with him, and I don't want.
Mhm.
And the third reason that, okay, so I'm not so like brave like you. I'm not ready to have intimidation from the state. And finally, which compensation we will have? We will find so many powers. We will find so many money and reputation. I prefer to refuse from this fight. You know that it's not first case in my
Well,
whole
she has
story.
those are arguments that make a certain amount of sense. Unfortunately, maybe that's the right decision for her. That's a horrible,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, but this decision is very profitable for nuclear industry.
sure.
It's that's exactly they want that the people refuse from their rights, because even me, I was asked many times, Nadia, why you should not stop? What do you want? Because the money which you will receive, it's not big money,
Mm-hmm.
and you have so many troubles, and they don't understand. What for me, what is important is it's a question of justice. For me, it's like there is no justice. I can't support it. But for many people, the question is justice is not so important, like a traveling and calm of family. And it's why today we are like in ignorance, like Trisha told, or intimidation, like in Russia, because it's much more easy to ignore us, to blame us, that to
Mm-hmm.
pay for victims,
Mm-hmm.
to recognize officially that it exists, and to stop to develop the things which are we should not develop because it's
Mm-hmm.
dangerous for life and rule.
Mm-hmm. Tricia, when you compare the illnesses, and you've probably made some sort of record of who got what kind of disease in the vicinity. You have several thousand people that you contacted, right? What's the most common thing? Is it cancer, or are there other illnesses? Do they compare to the kinds of diseases that Nadezhda encountered among the people she was helping?
Great. Okay, that's a good question. And I wanted to just say something real quick before that, before I forget.
Mm-hmm.
Something I was reading in your work, Nadia, was that um, children and future generations and spouses of workers are not compensated in the United States for their diseases that are compensated in nuclear workers. We have this federal law called, it's a really long name, I'll just abbreviate it, EEOICPA, that says that certain workers, nuclear workers, are often able to get compensation, sometimes without even doing any dose reconstruction, for the cancers they've developed from their work. Even if there are no records available, they give them the benefit of the doubt. The spouses who washed the laundry when the workers came home, who had tracked home radionuclides on the rugs in the houses, the children like me, child of nuclear workers who now has thyroid disease, hypoparathyroidism, thyroid cancer, autoimmune stuff. I have all kinds of stuff, no compensation. So very similar to what Nadia was saying. And so that was the first thing I wanted to mention, that in the United States, we had to resort to litigation, went on for 25 years. Only a few people with thyroid disease, thyroid cancer got settlements. This was settlements, not, jury verdicts. There were a few bellwether trials. 2 bellwether trials resulted in big verdicts for thyroid cancer clients. So the Department of Energy didn't want this to go to trial because they were afraid there'll be more verdicts for people with thyroid diseases. But all the people that did not have thyroid disease or thyroid cancer, but other cancers, and this is leading into your question, did not get settlements because there aren't the studies, the epidemiologic studies of exposure to low dose radiation, which is what they call these exposures from Nadia's site and from Hanford. And if you don't have the studies, then you can't prove causation in litigation. So we only had the studies from Chernobyl, Marshall Islands, and the Nevada test site on the iodine-related problems, and a few of the river cancers. We had a lot of river exposure as well, like you did with the Tetra River, but ours was not as huge as the Tetra River. So then, as to your question about diseases, no matter what site it is where there's low dose exposure to ionizing radiation, ours was chronic. So it was at Mayak also chronic exposures. You end up with fertility problems in women, autoimmune diseases. I have 3 autoimmune diseases, which puts me at pretty high risk. They're just kind of popping up now that I'm getting older. Thyroid cancers, thyroid disease, birth defects. We've had a few people, one woman born without eyes at all, no optic nerve, no eyes. I mentioned her story in my book. Other birth defects. So because you could take this, if you look at the radionuclides that came out of all these sites, you could do a comparison. You could say, this radionuclide, let's take I-131, came out of all these places. Almost every single place has a byproduct of radioiodine. You'll find the same health effects in the people and downwind. But there aren't studies of civilians and exposed families because they don't want these studies done, because if they started doing these studies, they'd see repeated diseases amongst the population, and then they'd have a problem on their hands. Mm-hmm. Like, they have not compensated these people in either country. The workers sometimes get some compensation, but the children, like me, or the spouses, no. So the similar health effects, that was your original question, because of the same radionuclides coming out.
They should be able to find the places just by looking at hotspots on the map of where there are higher numbers than usual of certain diseases. Did they do that and then sit on the information and hide it? Or did they fail to collect information?
They have this information because they're doing this research. We have a special Institute of Biophysics with 2 parts. One part who is served for Mayak workers, another part who served for the local population. But that for many years of work of this institution, they have studied to be tricky. It means that they're doing their studies, they are making their conclusion, but when you are reading their conclusion, you understand nothing. So they have a coefficient which influence many explanation, and finally it's influence or no, it's influence. But I always say, if we are doing so many research to study it, and you say that it's not dangerous, for what you are doing your research, I don't believe. If it is not dangerous, you will be spent money to making this research. Mm-hmm. But if we make this research, it should be for people, not for science. But you're doing just for science and for nuclear industry to keep secret. So for me, this picture is obvious. And they have results, but they prefer to be tricky. Do not, concern people, do not how to say, do not make a fear for people that if somebody like me and Trisha tell something, they say that it's a radiophobia, they suffer from radiophobia. And the situation, I think, the same is in USA, in Russia, in France also, because officially on the political level they are opponents, but on the level of cooperation they are friends. So they have a common workshops, they have a common conference of radiobiologists, common conference of public relation people, where they elaborate the things which how they should work with the population to continue keep information, keep secrets, and make it tricky with information. They have a huge experience. But it became the more and more complicated. That's why people can't understand nothing. Sometimes I think, that I have a free education, medical education, sociological, law education, and I can understand it. But how the people who are living near the teacher river, who have only school education, can understand it?
I'm not sure how different the situation is today from the way it was when you were both exposed. Have they improved their safety measures at all?
Well, you know that, of course, the nuclear industry had a big way. It's already 70 years, and we come to compare neither conditions of working, neither legislation which were developed. But influence of radiation is the same. Of course, they try to appreciate the measures to be more defended. But I think the problem is it's also heritage, because in most cases, for example, at Mayak, the plutonium plant is the same which were in 1946. And of course, maybe they built new buildings and maybe they produce it by another way, but at the same moment, the territory, the area which is around is contaminated. And also we know that they continue observe workers, and the workers are exposed, of course, not by the way which were exposed 70 years ago, but in any case, it is dangerous work, and the people has many benefits, and still there is a list of diseases which are connected with this work. So industry tries, but in any case, we can't to exclude the influence of radiation to workers, and especially for the population, and especially for the next generation. When we discuss with the people from nuclear industry, it's very profitable for them to work about condition of work today. They say that nuclear industry, it's a climate change decision, it is a clean industry, and I say always, and it is very profitable, do not speak about the next generation, about contamination of area, just about condition of work. Of course, condition of work is not the same, but in Russia, the legislation is constructed like there is a list of diseases which are officially connected with radiation influence. So after Chernobyl accident, this list were created, and it was a long list. I remember because my mother, she was working for the ambulance for the workers of Mayak. It was maybe 35 type of disease, and each year they cut this list, and for today it's a 4 type of disease. It's a cancer, it's a genetical damage, it's also cataract, and it's disease of blood. And we had
What was the fourth one? Disease of what?
leukemia, disease of blood.
Blood. Oh.
Yeah. But we had an interesting story because last year, in beginning of 2019, the Ministry of Health of Russian Federation decided to include, to add to this list heart disease.
Oh.
Heart disease for the list for the population, not for the professional. It means that because we have two different lists for population. And I saw the project of this document, which were at the site of Russian government, in which they added this type of disease, heart disease, to this list, and then it was stopped. I understand why, and now it's not developed because, and I wrote the document which explained why we should add this disease. It was written that the World Health Organization proved that the heart disease and cerebrovascular disease can also be the consequences of nuclear explosion. And then I understand that when they began to speak, when they began to discuss this new law, this add to law with the public, nuclear industry say, oh my God, heart disease, but most of population and most of workers of nuclear plant died from heart disease. You can't imagine what will be have. And they stopped it. So they did not include heart disease in Russian list of disease which connected with influence and radiation. But for me, it means today that there is such studies. It proved, because without it they did not do it, but just we have not political will to tell truth because it's too dangerous for them.
This is in response to the situation now at Hanford. There are 77 underground tanks, very similar to the ones at Mayak, the one that exploded at Mayak. They're very old, they're beyond their lifespan, and any of them could explode. They're in a very hot desert in the summer. They build up gas. So I think that Mayak's accident in 1957 should be a wake-up call for Hanford. The second thing is most of the work that's happening there, the plants, the production reactors have all closed down. There's one production reactor there, the Columbia Generating Station, but all the production reactors are closed down. But we have workers who are getting exposed to vapors, who are getting very sick, who didn't for a long time have the protective gear that they needed. They could ask for protective gear and they weren't given protective gear. And now there's some concern that the Biden administration may remove some of the new protections for these workers. They're very, very sick, some of them. So we have I call them the new group of downwinders, really, because these are young, mostly young people in there trying to handle all this waste. All this mixed waste in these huge, tanks that are underground that could explode at any time. So that's sort of the situation there right now.
Now, you mentioned protective equipment, so it calls to mind things that we see with the people who are working with COVID patients. What kind of gear do these folks wear, and does it really work? I mean, some types of particles emit radiation that goes through God knows what,
I know, yeah. Well, I'm not an expert in this, but I know that the respirators are helpful, but not, an actual respirator with an actual oxygen supply and one of this protective suits. But the problem, like you just mentioned, is if you have gamma, it could go through. I don't know if there are gamma rays being emitted, but it's also very, very hot in the summer, and it must be terribly hard to wear this stuff in the heat where you're already feeling miserable without any of this stuff on. So, but to me, the main issue is providing the equipment that is needed for these people and then taking care of them if they get sick. And there's a lot of these poor folks, you read these stories about these folks with terrible respiratory problems and just horrible, and they're not really getting the recognition that these things may be caused by the exposures they just had. It's very reminiscent of the downwinders trying to prove that our diseases were caused by radiation exposure. And just one point I want to make real quickly is I feel that civilians exposed in the United States or in the Marshall Islands, that's because that's where the US tested, to radiation from testing, from production facilities, from uranium mining, should be compensated for the same diseases that the workers are compensated for under this federal worker compensation law called the EEOICPA. There's no, we were kids when we were exposed, we had no choice. Whereas the workers were at least adults, even if they didn't know exactly what risks they were going to face. So why should you deprive children who are sick of the same protections that an adult gets? So that's just the point. I'm trying to push a national compensation plan based on the EEOICPA in this country. I don't know. Right now, there's efforts to expand RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, but that only applies to some of the people who are exposed. And it's very limited in the compensation. So anyway, it's just a big battle. Same problem with compensation.
You're both fighting the same battle, but separately, right? And what I'm thinking is, it would seem to me that what we need is an international campaign in which all of the points that you're making about, for example, compensating the families of people who were exposed and not just the workers, et cetera. There are probably a dozen other points that you would both make. I imagine if you had your agenda and your platform or your the requests that you were demanding, if you compared them, there's going to be a lot of similarity, right? Well, there are probably people not only in Russia and the U.S., but in every nuclear country that have the same grievances but are not in touch with each other. If what we need, I would think, is bring you two together so you can come up with your own list of demands, but then introduce you to some folks in China and some folks in Israel and some folks in Pakistan, etc. The people who all are exposed to not only, of course, then we could talk not only about people exposed to radiation from working on nuclear weapons, but also people exposed to radiation from working in nuclear power plants. Because, you know, one of the things I did as a talk show a couple of months ago was I interviewed a guy named Yachko, that's his name. He was the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the U.S. And he finally said, nuclear power cannot be made safe. He said, I couldn't do it. And if I couldn't do it, nobody else could, because the lobby of the nuclear producers, then he's just now talking about the nuclear power plant industry, that all of those facilities are subject to lobbying, political pressure, so that he could not, in many cases, they had more influence than he did. And he couldn't impose the kind of changes that he thought were really required in order to make something safer. So bringing these people together so that you're not two people on opposite sides of the planet, but you're part of the same community of protest. Have you thought of doing that?
When we say about the nuclear victims, first generation, second generation, or exploded, exposed population, we should tell about violation of human rights. Because I think that the main victory of nuclear lobby in the law field, that when we say about nuclear damage, we say about the social compensation. We don't say about the violation of human rights. We say about social compensation. But, you know, when we say about social compensation, it's always the question of will. At another side, if we say about violation of human rights, it is necessary to how to say, everybody knows that we should not have violation of human rights, and social compensation is not so strong. And the nuclear lobby, which signed the agreement in Paris in '60, when they decided that the nuclear compensation will be excluded from the civil field of damage like a normal damage, because usually the conception is very simple. There is a person, physical or low person, who is guilty. There is a victim. There is a uh, causal link, and we should have compensation. It's a principle of damage. But nuclear industry receive a special excluding rights, do not pay compensation in equal because it's violation of human rights, but pay what they have for this moment. It's their big their big victory for them. And I think that we should change to tell about the compensation like a social issue. We should say about violation of human rights, because we are just looking the main documents. It's a violation right of life, right of family life, and right of it means the protocol one of European possession. It means that people can lose their houses, their lands. It's always violation of human rights, but they don't tell about this, and we should always tell. We should always take this. Let's say, but of course, our power is not the same, because you know that if you will look the budget of nuclear enterprises, nuclear departments, you will see that there is a huge part of money which they spend for the public relation. So everybody suffer from aerophobia, nobody suffer from disease. And also with the epidemiological studies, it's interesting because they are making epidemiological studies, and they say, okay, there is a negative consequences for the population and equal, but then when the concrete person goes to the court and asks this compensation, okay, they told it, no, we can't make this conclusion that in this case it's radiation who influenced it. For whole population, yes, but for this concrete person, no. And it's like a big game for them. And I'm agree, of course, if there are another people who are interested, we should work together, because you know that.
Okay, you know what? Our website is called tosavetheworld.ca. We have 6 different global threats, and one of them is radioactive contamination, which is your thing. Now, I hope that you will both feel I'm encouraging you and urging you to post these remarks and these proposals and these ideas on that same on the comments page. We have a place for discussion. You can comment and you can reply to each other. You can hold real discussions there. And I'm hoping that you post it there. And I'm going to try to reach out over time to other organizations of other people in other countries who have also been exposed to radioactive contamination. So there'd be one single place where people can go and put their ideas out and share their concerns and their proposals and their demands. And then out of this, it may be that who knows when, a year or two in the future, maybe we can begin to try to talk about creating a list or a network of people everywhere who have the same worries that you both have. Would that be of value to you?
Yes, and even if you know that the problem, I do not know for Trisha, but for me the problem that like lawyers, it's very complicated to work with the people who are not lawyers, because you know that it's little bit that we should change the law, but people don't understand. But what could be could be really useful, it's even memories. You know that now we are thinking about next year, because next year will be 65 years of Mayak accident. And I was thinking that maybe we should organize like a site where people can send their memories about their families, about the stories of their parents, grandparents who were working or who were living there. Why it's useful? Because you know, with
Well,
time
listen, I quite agree, but you can also put the things like that on these comment columns. it would be a mixture of things that are both, legal and technical, and also just memories of people who have suffered. I want to encourage you to do it anyway, and then we can talk further if there needs to be some additional way in which we can, the Project Save the World can support an expansion of your work. We'll do it for sure. Tricia, are you on board?
Yeah, I'm very impressed by your efforts to, I just love the title Save the World to start with. And I really like all the effort that you're putting into uniting people. Some people have given up by now. They just figure it's not going to happen. And you have this wonderful positive attitude and network of people, and you just keep going. And that's real essential. I admire.
Well, you and I have it easy because we speak English, and I don't know about people in Mayak who probably don't know much. Not many of them know English, and Nadezhda can't be the interpreter for everybody in the world. But we've got to find a way, And I hope we can find ways of bringing people together who have all the worries that you have, and that I'm so impressed with both of you, and I just love to count you as friends of mine,
In any case, we should continue to tell about it.
Yeah.
Tell about stories of people who we knew, about our stories, because, from my opinion, the humanity began to forget about dangerousity of nuclear weapons, nuclear war, and nuclear power. All this public relation campaign, which is around the nuclear industry, began us in the very dangerous place. That sometimes in Russia I have heard that maybe little nuclear war, it's not bad. That people became, I remember that in our childhood we were very, of course it was not good for the workers, but like a child we always think about how it's dangerous nuclear war. But new generation, they don't understand. That's why we should continue to tell.
Well, look, I'll tell you what. Let's do this again, and you can each bring somebody else. You're not the only two people in the world who have been through the ringer, and let's do it again and bring more people into this conversation. Okay.
Oh, thank you for what you're doing, Metta. Thank you very much for what you're doing. You're doing important.
I love it.
Thank you, Metta.
It's my greatest pleasure, and it's wonderful
to be for give us voices.
Both of you. Okay, we got to say goodbye. I'm going to have a hard time editing this.
Goodbye. Glad to see you.